So we're joined today by four fabulous speakers who will share their insight with us on the benefits of hedgerows and their role in biodiversity, as well as resources available to support farmers and landowners. We'll hear from Susan Chan, bona fide pollinator expert, Doug Kennedy, our resident tree specialist, Ola Pasternak from Kawartha Conservation, and Jen Nash from Ontario Soil and Crop. So first, we welcome Susan Chan, agroecologist, and she studies the relationship between crop production and wild bees. She works part-time for the University of Guelph and co-manages a regenerative permaculture farm in Peterborough County with her daughter. There they grow cut flowers, fruit, vegetables, they keep honeybees, they raise sheep and chickens, so plenty going on at their farm. I'll pass things off to you, Sue, so feel free to share your screen and begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm really pleased to be here today, and I'm going to jump right in so that we don't waste any time. I'm going to be talking to you today about hedgerows as pollinator habitat. And I'm very interested in this topic because I'm interested in all things that have to do with farms. So I'm going to begin by talking about bees. When we talk about pollinators, this includes other things other than bees, but my expertise is with bees, and so I'm going to stick to that. And I justify this also because bees are really the most important pollinators in all systems, natural and agricultural. So there is one managed bee species in Ontario, and this is a species that was brought from Europe. It's a very important species. It's not, there's nothing bad about this species, but it's not wild. We have 400 species of wild bees, and about 21% of those, or about a fifth of them, are associated with crops, and the rest of them are associated with natural lands. Bees have suites of traits. So when we talk about bees, it's a small word, but it encompasses a lot of different variability. As you can see on this slide, the bees don't necessarily all look like each other. Some bees nest in the ground, some bees nest above ground, some bees nest in cavities. Another trait that they could have is a sociality. So some bees are social bees. They live in groups and they have a queen. Some bees are social part of the time and solitary part of the time, and some bees are always solitary. The great majority of bees are solitary bees, which means they don't have a queen. Each bee is reproductive. The next thing that is a trait is their phenology, and what this means is it just simply means when they're around. So when do we see certain bees? So some bees are spring bees, some bees are summer bees, some bees are fall bees, and some bees, like bumblebees, are around all year long. During the growing season. Okay, so if we're trying to create habitat for them, if we're interested in spring bees and creating habitat for spring bees, then we have to have habitat that provides food for them in the spring. The other thing about bees is that they can be specialists or they can be generalists. So generalists are most bees. Most bees will visit almost any plant that you put out there that provides nectar or pollen. But there are a small number of bees that are specialists, and these bees have strong plant preferences. So I work with a bee that has a strong plant preference for a crop, which is pumpkin and squash, and that bee is the squash bee. However, that's fairly unusual. Different bees are different sizes. So if you look at this picture, you can see there's some of them are really tiny. So the lasioglossums, they're really tiny, whereas bumblebees are huge in comparison. And then we have everything in between. The tiny bees tend not to be able to travel very far. So they can go between 100 and 500 meters from their nests where they live to whatever plant they're using as foraging habitat. Bumblebees can fly about 1 kilometer, and honeybees fly between 3 and 5 kilometers. Of course, every bee, it is an advantage to every bee to have their foraging habitat as close as possible to their nesting habitat. So when I think about hedgerows, I think about 3 different ways in which they can provide habitat. They can provide nesting habitat. So about 70% of bees nest in the soil, and hedgerows are not ideal for providing habitat to these bees, although there can be some spillover soil area where there's nothing planted, or in the early stages of establishing a hedgerow, there can be bare soil and bees can nest in that. But what they're really good at, hedgerows are really good at providing habitat for bees that nest in hollow stems. So that's about 30% of bees. And these bees not only need hollow stems, but they need materials to build the walls between the cells within hollow stems for their nests. And so those materials can be leaves, petals, mud, water, and these can all be provided, with the exception of water, these can all be provided within a hedgerow. Then there are the bees. These are bumblebees primarily that nest in pre-made cavities, such as rodents' nests or cavities between rocks. And some of these bees will also nest above ground in straw bales. So if any of you have barns, inevitably you'll encounter a bumblebee nest in your straw bales, and you'll have to call somebody in to get rid of it because it's very angry at you. So one of the things you can do is have straw bales outside in your hedgerows to provide habitat to those bees and to those bumblebees. The other thing that hedgerows do are provide foraging habitat, and they do this through flowers. Flowers provide nectar, which is a source of energy and minerals for bees. They provide pollen, which is a source of protein and fats. And bees, especially solitary bees, feed pollen directly to their offspring. Okay. They feed nectar directly to their offspring. It's only really honeybees that are making honey and then feeding that to their offspring. And some plants also provide oils that bees use. And so most of these oils are in forbs, they're not in trees, which is what I'm going to concentrate on. Hedgerows can also provide overwintering habitat, and this is really, really important for bumblebee queens. So this is where there's a lot of litter, leaf litter or plant litter on the ground. Then the bees can kind of dig down into the litter and spend the winter. And I'll tell you a little bit more about honeybee queens because they're kind of an unusual situation. And the other thing that's important within hedgerows is that hedgerows provide protection from exposure to insecticides, and this is really critical for the 21% of species that are associated with crops. Excuse me. Okay, I just want to briefly talk about bumblebees because they are such important pollinators and they can really take advantage of hedgerows. So I don't know if you can see at the bottom of your screen, but on my screen it's blocked, so I don't know if you guys can see it. No. Sorry about that. Okay, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little hibernacula and there's a queen bee, and that queen bee would be around right about now. She would be hibernating in the ground in a little hole that she's made, and she has already been mated. She's going to emerge in about early April and start looking for things to eat. And once she finds things to eat, most of the things that she finds to eat at that time of year will be shrubs and trees. She will then start to make a nest. And she will start when she has enough, when she's raised enough offspring, the offspring, who are all female workers, will start to forage on her behalf and start to care for the larvae that she continues to produce. And she'll just become reproductive. And then in August, she'll produce new queens and males, and they'll mate. And those queens will leave the colony and find hibernacula to stay in. So you can see that that hibernacula stage is really, really important for colony longevity from one season to another, because everything except the queens that overwinter in the hibernacula die. This is an example of a social bee that has a solitary phase. Solitary bees, on the other hand, will produce one generation per year, and one bee will make a nest, and she'll build cells, she'll put pollen and nectar in those cells, lay an egg, the egg will hatch into a larva, the larva will hatch into a pupa, and most species spend the winter that way and will emerge the next year. This is an example of a solitary bee that nests in a hollow stem. This is a fake hollow stem, but you can see here that she's used mud between each cell to make her nest. And some bees use leaves, like leafcutter bees do that. Okay, and this is if I were going to make if I were starting from scratch with a hedgerow, I'd throw a few straw bales into the hedgerow to provide habitat for bumblebees to make their nests. Okay, now on farms generally, except on permaculture farms, but on farms generally, the wide open spaces are for annual crops, and there's not really any place for hedgerows or trees because they get in the way of production. And so I'm sorry, not any room for trees or shrubs. And hedgerows are a perfect place then to put those trees and shrubs that support pollinators. If I were going to have to choose one plant to put in a hedgerow for pollinators, it would be pussy willow. So pussy willow, does grow in wet conditions, but I've got pussy willows in very dry conditions and they do just fine. So the bees can come to pussy willow for nectar and for pollen as early as March. I've got pussy willows in bloom now, but they're just not producing pollen yet. So this is a really important early season source for especially bumblebees and early andrenids, for example. And the early part of the season, we often think there's nothing for bees to eat because we're not looking up. So on the tops of trees, you have flowers, and these are flowers from very common trees, ash, red maple, poplar, oak. All of these trees bloom and produce pollen, and bees will go to them for those protein sources. These trees don't depend on bees, however. Another thing that I would put in a hedgerow is raspberry. And I'd put it in for two reasons. It produces copious nectar and pollen, so it's a great foraging habitat, but it also produces, as the raspberries grow, they produce these the older canes, the second-year canes, dry up, and the pith in them goes away, and bees can then drill holes in the pith. And so you see on the bottom here, the bottom slide, the top one is the flower, the bottom one is the stem, and you can see little holes in the top. Those are the nest entrances of Seratina, which is a very small little bee that's really important for crop pollination. And so if you can have raspberries in your hedgerow, you provide nesting habitat for them. And of course, once they've gone through and pollinated, you also end up with all kinds of other benefits called raspberries that you can eat or other creatures can eat. Elderberry is another one that I would choose, again, for its dual ability to provide nesting habitat and foraging habitat, because as elderberry grow and become older, a lot of the elderberry stems dry out, and then you have a hollow stem for bees to nest in. The berries from elderberry are really great for food, and they're also medicinal. Sumac is another plant in this category that provides really great nectar at this stage. When it's in flower, it looks green. You hardly notice it, but there are lots of bees that visit sumac, and there are even some bees that specialize on sumac. And again, it provides dry stems for bees to nest in. Other plants that I would include would be serviceberry, really early spring blooming, provides great nectar sources and pollen sources for early bees, and then produces a crop of berries that birds can eat. High bush cranberry, again, neither of these provides nesting habitat, but they do provide foraging habitat. Hawthorn is another one that I would put in a hedgerow. Again, this is a nectar producer and a pollen producer. I haven't included apple in here, but apple is also a great thing to put in a hedgerow. Or pear. Another one of my favorites is the indigo bush. This is Amorpha fruticosa. Bumblebees love this plant. It's really easy to grow, and I've got it on my place, and I've got it in all kinds of conditions, in dry and wet conditions, and it does really, really well. It's very easy to grow from seed also. So I highly recommend this plant. Now, I've just given you a few little lists of my favorites, but there are many, many more plants that can be put in a hedgerow, and Farms at Work has a great resource. It's called a decision tool for creating pollinator habitat on farms, and you can find it at this web address. And you can go through there and design pollinator habitat for anywhere, but you can also design it for hedgerows. Okay, I think I've taken up all of my time. If you need to get a hold of me, this is how you do it, and I'm happy to field questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was fabulous. I will pass things off to Doug Kennedy, our next speaker. So feel free to get your slides queued up, Doug. Doug is an environmental technologist, an M&R certified managed forest plan approver, a butternut health assessor, and the owner of Green Side Up Environmental Services. He's been working in the environmental and horticulture industry since 1996, when he first ventured into North Ontario as a tree planter. And since then, he hasn't looked back. He continues to learn and push forward as a pioneer in the green industry. So take it away, Doug.
Thank you very much. Great talk, Sue. I really appreciate that. Always look forward to your stuff. Yes, like Emma mentioned, my name is Doug Kennedy. I operate and own Green Side Up Environmental Services. And we also have our farm over in Omemia at Greenside Farm, where we operate our native plant nursery and a bunch of other different really interesting sustainable projects on farms. Today we'll be talking about trees and hedgerows and the benefit they are to the farmer. And we'll get moving. I guess topics of discussion are: what are they? Types of hedgerows, windbreaks, wildlife corridors, and buffer strips will be the three I'm talking about, and the benefits and purposes. And there'll be a kind of an order in this, the three plants, starting from the windbreaks to buffer strips. And I kind of unintentionally did it in that order, and they each have their own production level and benefit, kind of in an order like that. Windbreaks being the most basic form of a hedgerow, all the way down to the buffer strip, which provides pretty much the same needs of all three at one shot. Hedgerows. So what are they? Hedgerows, they're, as the text says, they're a fence or a corridor or a boundary formed by a dense row of shrubs or trees. Hedgerows, they're designed and planted to help encompass a space that can be used or isolated from another space, so protect from wind and erosion, create corridors, and keeping livestock in as well. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of what a hedgerow is in regards to how you manage your land. So types of hedgerows. The windbreak, like I mentioned, this one is probably our most anthropocentric type of hedgerow. It's essentially just something that we develop and plant and use for our own personal gain. More of an industrious idea, and you would have see lots of this mostly, I guess, in Europe, is with a lot of their hedgerows through the UK and places like that. Mostly what we use it for is for wind protection. You will see a lot of that on the farmstead, and also through different types of agricultural spaces in Ontario, because we have different types of agriculture and intensities in Ontario, from southern Ontario all the way up to central Ontario. Just a couple pictures so we can talk about that. On the right, you're going to see a couple more real life pictures of the uses of a windbreak. On the left is your illustration to clarify it. The top left there, it's getting into the point of how they use windbreaks to cover around the house, because a long time ago, when they cleared all the land and they found out living in a big open space probably was not that beneficial to these rickety old houses that have no insulation, and barns and barnyards for animals that have no cover anymore. So just basic coverage of using a windbreak is to protect the house, energy use, protect your livestock and everything in and around the farmyard. We've done lots of projects like that over the years, where we're working with a landowner where the windbreak had long deteriorated and wasn't maintained, and kind of reinstate it. And down on the bottom right is something more traditional of southern Ontario. If you do a nice drive down there, you'll see a lot of white cedar windbreaks, very straight and very, very organized. There's not many woodlots left, and there's a lot of the landscape that is really just made up of windbreaks. It's like a dominant feature on the landscape, second to the cash crop farm. Another perfect benefit of the windbreak, and a very prime one, the larger scale, is in your erosion control. And I think a lot of the people who are watching this presentation may know about a lot of this information already, but we have a short period of time to provide this. But there's some pretty obvious and basic information in regards to this: is protecting your soils in an agricultural setting from blowing away. Also keeping snow and the weather from blasting across the landscape in the wintertime. And you see some other pictures here in regards to that. You see this a lot around where we are here. Very obvious. You can see the picture to the right in the center, how snow is retained on the land after it starts to melt off in the windbreaks. So this is helping with groundwater recharge. It's keeping the water on the land and keeping it from blowing away. We just had snow here in Omemee a couple weeks ago, and by the next day, after gusts and winds all night long, I'd say half of the 8 inches of snow we received was gone. When it fell at night, it was 8 inches of snow and you couldn't see any of the grass or the hayfield stubble. But by the morning, you could see the tops of all the grass everywhere. It had blown all the snow away because of just lack of coverage in an agricultural area. You'll see these typical snow drifts. You'll see this a lot on roads where they plant the windbreaks on a property boundary adjacent to a road. And the bottom one always gets me. I see a lot of that in going down the 115 in Ontario. You'll see a lot of fields that are just, the snow is brown, and it's just the perfect picture of why you need to protect your soil, why we need windbreaks, because it's blowing away. And in that picture, just a simple row of trees has allowed the snow to settle, and it has allowed to let the soil settle back again on the ground. So utilizing this, having strategy in regards to how far apart your windbreaks are. You can have windbreaks, but if they're very, very far apart, they only provide benefit in that small area. So, in summary to windbreaks, reducing soil erosion is probably the biggest impact in that industrious farm setting. Some of the other byproducts of is increased crop yield. So through reducing wind scald and protecting the crop from all that. Protecting your livestock, they have cover. Our animals, they frequently spend a lot of the time in our hedgerow windbreaks, just as for shade and cover and protect them from the bugs. So there's lots of different reasons why we want to have just the basic windbreak. But as we move on to this presentation, we'll just get into a bit more complex needs. Not so anthropocentric, maybe getting into, our needs, but also our local nature, flora, fauna needs. So wildlife corridors, they're a strip of nature. It provides a habitat and it provides connection for populations of wildlife that are separated from, say, one interior woodlot to the next woodlot, or even from a wetland adjacent to a water body like a lake, and then a large farm field, and then a large woodlot maybe at the top of a hill. It provides that connection so they can travel back and forth. Such as pollinators. So Sue was talking some about those 1 kilometer species. And I guess if that's a maximum, having a pathway for them to travel back and forth to these food spaces is quite crucial. So you start to look at a larger space, a larger piece of land. This is an air photo or a drone photo of our farm. Imagine being a little tiny bee that can only travel 1 kilometer at the most. Our farm is about 750 meters, 700 meters from front to back. And the journey it's got to take just to get to the back, let alone come back. The wind, the rain, predation, and all those different things. And that's just for the tiny little bee. It's also a valuable corridor for interconnection between wildlife such as squirrels, chipmunks, and birds, and other larger mammals and predators. Without the structure, they can't venture out into this open desert of like a cash crop, like a bean, wheat, or cornfield. Essentially has no water, it has no food source, and it just becomes a void that they can't get across. Our farm here, you'll see it's divvied up into 5 different fields. The back adjacent to the woodlot and the Pigeon River, that is a 15-acre field we've renaturalized. So now it's become more of a natural setting with lots of food and diversity. But our main 4 fields in the front, they have connection. So a bird coming from the woodlot over in the east, which is the right of your screen, can now travel through these corridors all the way to the woodlot on the west. These woodlots on the left and the right of your screen are interior woodlots, so they've got a minimum size that can provide for species of birds and animals that require deep coverage of the forest. There are species of birds and insects that will not cross that like I call the desert pretty much. There's nothing out there in a cash crop field other than the one species. So providing this transportation corridor is the main function for getting from A to B, sharing gene pools, cross-pollination from the woodlot on the left to the woodlot on the right. And just there's so many different complex ways this is all working together that we just can't even cover in 10 minutes. Corridors provide that connection, like I mentioned. Here's a couple different pictures to give you an idea. The picture on the top left connects that woodlot far in the top horizon of the picture all the way down into the bottom. And this particular one actually shares a creek. And you can see how important it is. There are species that will not cross that space. And they have no ability to get from A to B and share resources with each other, whether it be for pollen or for food or just expanding their population. The two pictures in the bottom right and the bottom are very typical of a central southern Ontario corridor. Poplar, white cedar with an understory of shrubs. And then common this day is like a buckthorn understory of shrubs. And that's our farm is, we have lots of buckthorn on our farm, and it seems like a futile effort at times to get rid of it. And then now as I get older and as time goes by, I wonder why we're getting rid of it. Should we be getting rid of it, right? But these are other ethical questions in regards to natural heritage that we can talk on another time. And I look forward to any questions too at the end in regards to stuff like that. Buffer strips. This one's my favorite because it pretty much encompasses everything that you're going to find in a hedgerow or a windbreak. And it's also adding on to that aspect of providing conservation for quality and quantity of water quality within our watersheds, protecting the creeks, the rivers, or a wetland or a lake. And you don't even have to be buffering a water body. You could have an interior woodlot that has very little edge to protect it. You could be planting up on that edge there to help protect other types of interior habitat. But the main function in regards to a buffer strip hedgerow is protecting, that in our area of Ontario is protecting creeks and rivers and things like that. So filtration, sediment control, nutrient uptake as the groundwater and surface water passes its way through. And here's just a little example of one of our projects. And this was a farm field that was bought by a retiree couple, and they built their dream home here. This would have been a cash crop or a hay field at any different time of its life. And they were building a new horse barn with a new house. So increased nutrient input into the landscape. And they had this intermittent to an ephemeral creek running right through the middle of it. So we worked with them in a couple different funding organizations into stabilizing that, because the cash crop would wash into this channel, and then that channel would flood in the spring and wash that on down through the watershed. So they decided to put a 15-meter buffer on each side, and it essentially becomes a windbreak for the house, which would be to the right of the picture, and then to the barnyard to the left of the picture. And as this time goes by, this will become larger, more established. It's going to perform all the benefits. Windbreak for the infrastructure. It's going to provide water quality and protection for the watershed. It's going to provide a connection from a habitat that's to the west of this property, and to the east of the property, they own the woodlot and they have a managed forest plan in there. So it's all part of their managed forest plan expansion and all these wonderful things that we get to do as land managers and stewardship people. Here's a couple other.
I hate to cut you off, but I'll give you one more minute to wrap things up. Thank you. You obviously have so much to share. It's really interesting. Yeah, one more minute.
So these are the last one or two slides. We've got a couple. There's on the right, you'll see a larger example of a buffer strip, which is also acting as a hedgerow between those two different fields and a river in the middle. It allows the farmer to straighten his fields so he can have a more manageable crop to manage with his equipment, versus trying to traverse the marginal and soppy wetlands and wet land that are adjacent to the creek. And then also in the picture on the left, that illustration kind of shows you some successional planting ideas in regards to how you can do that. Last two slides here is just what we do at GSU. We specialize in all types of ecological restoration and environmental landscape projects, from residential all the way up to hundreds of acres, working with the government and OPG, Hydro One, farmers, of all types. We work with a lot of different agencies in regards to coordinating the different agencies to partner with the landowner and help them get some funding for establishment and also annual payments for your ecological good and service you are providing. But other than that, I'm really glad you had me for the day, and I appreciate it, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations. I'll mute.
Thank you so much, Doug. Awesome. I learned a lot, I know. So our next speaker is Ola Pasternak from Kawartha Conservation. Ola is the new landowner and community support person at Kawartha Conservation. She focuses on managing stewardship and grant programs across the Kawartha watershed. Doug, you might need to stop sharing your screen in order for Ola to queue up her slides.
Yep. Thank you for the introduction, Emma.
Emma, I wonder if you start sharing your screen, it will kick off Doug's, and then you can stop sharing, and Ola should be able to jump in.
Good plan. Okay, there we go. I'm going to stop my share, and Ola, you should be ready to jump on.
Great. All right, can you see the full presentation here? Hello?
Yes, we can
Okay.
see.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, thanks again for the introduction. As Emma mentioned, my name is Ola Pasternak and I work for Kawartha Conservation as landowner and community support. Today, I will present a brief overview of our programs we offer that may help support your next hedgerow project. The first program I would like to mention is our Water Fund program. Water Fund applications are now open on our website until May 15th, 2024. The Water Fund is a cost-sharing program that supports environmental projects specifically related to improving water quality. Projects may be approved up to 50% of the total approved project costs to a maximum of $4,000. Approved projects will receive funds after the project is completed and documents are submitted. The total project cost excludes HST. Eligibility. Applicants must be within the Kawartha watershed and City of Kawartha Lakes, or the Kawartha watershed and Durham region, or an area within the City of Kawartha Lakes not covered by another conservation authority. Priority will be given to projects near water and that have the potential to improve water quality or terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Priority will also be given to first-time applicants. Now I will be reviewing some eligible Water Fund project ideas. Tree planting. Project ideas for tree planting include block planting, windbreak or hedgerow planting, shoreline planting, and more. If you have a specific project in mind, you can get in touch with our team and we can provide recommendations or help determine your project's eligibility. Tips for applicants include using only native species in your project, as only native species will be funded, and to ensure you space your trees 1 tree every 4 meters squared and shrubs at every 1 meter squared. Here are photos of one of our shoreline tree planting projects along Sturgeon Lake, which included species such as eastern white cedar. So here you can see there's not much going on. There are a few trees there, but it's quite bare. And then here is the after photo. We have the cedars planted there as well as some perennials and shrubs. This is going to help with erosion control and help absorb any excess runoff coming from the cottage property. Here are some photos of one of our other tree planting projects near Bethany, which included species such as red oak and silver maple. In this before photo, you can see there's a lot of destruction after a storm that happened. And in the after photo, you can see the plantings of some oaks and maples. Agricultural project ideas include naturalization like tree, shrub, or perennial planting, water management solutions such as barnyard eaves troughs, alternate watering systems, exclusion fencing, and tile drain control boxes, as well as other best management practices such as windbreaks or hedgerows, vegetated buffers, cover crops, and manure storage structures. Applicant tips for agricultural projects include emphasizing the project's proximity to lakes or rivers, the project's impact on water quality and farm operations. Another important point to note is that water and sediment erosion control structures must be designed and overseen by a certified engineer or erosion control structure designer following OMAFRA standards. Here's a photo. I believe it was near Pigeon Lake. It was one of our Kawartha Water Fund projects. And in the before photo, there's cattle entering the pond. And this is, of course, causing erosion, sedimentation, nutrient loading, which is destructive to the aquatic ecosystem and is not healthy for the cattle when they're drinking the very unclean water. And then in the after photo, you can see the exclusion fencing as well as an alternate watering system powered by a solar panel. There are many other projects that are eligible for the Water Fund program, including but not limited to waterfront restoration, such as planting and erosion control, urban projects such as rain gardens, rain barrels and French drains, septic and well upgrades, well decommissions, and community projects for nonprofit organizations or registered charities. Here's a list of some of the ineligible costs where I've highlighted the areas that are related to hedgerow planting specifically. This includes non-native or invasive species, purchase of equipment to complete projects, projects that have already begun or been completed, HST, as well as other expenses not recommended by the Water Fund Review Committee or approved by Kawartha Conservation. For more information about the Water Fund, you can contact me or visit our landowner grants page on our website at kawarthaconservation.com. Next, I will provide a brief overview of our 50 million tree program, which is led by Colleen Cathcart, our forester at Kawartha Conservation. The 50 million tree program focuses on large-scale tree planting in collaboration with Forests Ontario. The project area must allow for planting 500 trees or more. 40 to 85% of the costs may be eligible for coverage. Types of eligible projects include afforestation, reforestation, riparian buffers, and windbreaks. If you have any specific questions about this program, please contact Colleen Cathcart. This information is also available on our website under the tree planting webpage. If you are outside of the Kawartha watershed, you can contact Forests Ontario directly regarding this program. Next, I will briefly touch upon our 2024 seedling sale. Our 2024 seedling sale is now open on our website until March 10th. You can buy deciduous and coniferous trees and shrubs at a discounted rate. If you have any specific questions, you can contact Colleen Cathcart, and her information is here. I can also post it in the chat as well. As a quick note, we will also be opening our native plant sale in late March or early April. You can buy native perennials at a discounted price that can help stabilize your shoreline, attract pollinators, or to create a rain garden to absorb excess runoff. You can contact me for further information, and I can subscribe you to our webpage so you'll be notified when the sale opens. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. My contact information is on the screen, and I can also post it in the chat afterwards.
Thank you so much, Ola. This is fabulous. So moving right along, last but certainly not least, we have Jennifer Nash joining us from Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. So I'll stop my share and allow you to queue up your slides. Jen Nash is one of 13 OSCIA field staff in Ontario. She facilitates the environmental farm plan workshops across the East Central region, and she also assists farmers preparing OSCIA delivered cost share applications and project claims. She's a seasoned greenhouse grower and a sheep farmer herself, so she can certainly identify with the farmers that she's supporting. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you very much, Emma. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to talk about cost share opportunities related to hedgerows, or from Ontario Soil and Crops side of things, field boundary habitat. we have two programs specifically that I'd like to talk about today. But first, just a little bit of background on Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. So we have two aspects. One is the association side of things, so 4,000 members strong across the province, grassroots farm organization. And we also have the operations side of things, which is that we facilitate and deliver a number of cost share opportunities to farmers across the province. You'll see our vision is about seeking and testing and adopting optimal farm production practices through, and this is done through our mission. We're responsible for economic management of soil, water, and air through our crops, and always our motto as farmers, working with farmers and for farmers. So the two cost share opportunities that are related to hedgerows, and in fact, these two programs have other categories within them, but I'll just address the hedgerow categories for today. The first one is called SARFIP, which is the Species at Risk Farm Incentive Program. It's funded through the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and that's done through the Species at Risk Stewardship Program. It addresses directly best management practices that support species at risk. And then we have a second program, also species at risk. This one's called SARPAL, and it is the Species at Risk Partnerships on Agricultural Lands program. And that one is funded directly by Environment and Climate Change Canada. And that one directly addresses 12 target species. So a little bit about the first program, which is SARFIP, Species at Risk Farm Incentive Program. The categories directly related to hedgerows include fencing to exclude livestock from woodland areas, native tree planting, which includes tree windbreaks and buffer strips. There's also a category for biodiversity enhancement planning. We have funding available for corridors that connect habitat. Also habitat structures and enhancement. There's funding available as well for invasive plant species control. And lastly, a little more creative category, which is other specific species at risk improvement projects. This one allows the farmer to propose a project. There is an additional requirement under this one, a self-assessment habitat assessment must be provided when applying for this program, or for that category, I should say. Next, we have the SARPAL program. The two categories that most specifically address hedgerows would be tree planting and shrub planting, and that includes, again, tree windbreaks and buffer strips. And then again, we also have fencing to exclude livestock from woodland areas. And you can see on this slide that there are the 12 species at risk that this program addresses specifically. So here's the available funding under SARFIP. Cost share is allocated depending on the project being implemented. The way it works is if you can prove an indirect benefit to that species at risk, there is a 45% cost share up to $15,000. A direct benefit would be 60% cost share up to $20,000. There's an opportunity here to access an additional 15% in cost share if you are willing to enter into an agreement and have a technical specialist visit your project site afterwards and do some monitoring to prove that direct benefit. Under the SARPAL program, we have 50% of eligible costs up to a total of $20,000 available per program year for participating farmers. And the actual conservation agreement that is part of this program will differ from 1 to 5 years depending on the category and project that you're implementing. So the important dates are this. Under SARFIP, the next intake opens on April 1st at 9 a.m. and it closes when the budget is fully allocated. The eligible invoice dates are from April 1st to December 15th of this year. Under SARPAL, the intake will open on May 14th at 9 a.m. Same process. It will close when the budget is fully allocated. And again, the eligible invoice dates are the same, April 1st to December 15th. So who's eligible to apply? There are, you have to be actively farming or own actively farmed land in Ontario. And it has to be demonstrated through one of 4 different eligibility requirements. Number 1 would be a farm business registration number. If you don't have a farm business registration number, you could provide a religious exemption letter provided by OMAFRA Appeals Tribunal, or a cultural exemption letter from the First Nations Agricultural and Finance Ontario through for First Nations producers. Or there is still eligibility if you own 25 acres of land or more assessed as farm from your most current municipal property tax assessment notice. You also have to have completed an environmental farm plan, and at the moment that would be the 4th edition, and provide a valid premises identification number. So a little bit about the environmental farm plan. We sort of consider it a 4-stage process. You attend a 2-day workshop. There is an option to do the environmental farm plan online. It's called an EEFP, but for participants who are doing the environmental farm plan for the first time, we suggest that you do the workshop environment. So the process is that you complete a farm review or a self-assessment. You identify and develop action plans to help reduce the environmental risks on your farm. You submit that workbook, environmental farm plan workbook, for review, and then you begin to develop and implement your action plans. The other requirement was the premises identification number. This is a free number. You register your agricultural lands, and this number pertains directly to traceability. And the website address is there to register your agricultural lands. So here's the process for applying for that, either the SARFIP or SARPAL cost share. First, we suggest that folks go and read the program guide. Those are currently being updated for this year and will be up shortly. But each of those program guides contains the following: who's eligible to apply. The last few slides that I just talked about, but it includes eligible and ineligible activities and costs, what you would need to know about in kind, because there is an opportunity for that kind of cost share, how much each cost, or what's available in terms of cost share funding, guidelines, what you need to apply, any documentation that would be included with your application, how do you submit that application, limits, any other ineligible costs, and then also how to submit your claim once your project is actually complete. We tell farmers often that the number one reason that folks are declined for cost share is that they didn't read the program guide carefully. So we always suggest that a couple of your reviews of that program guide is worthy before actually entering into an application. So we have provided additional resources on our website for anyone wishing to apply for the SARPAL or SARFIP project. And those include a number of things: species-specific habitat enhancement, information about habitat restoration. There are research papers listed on our website, links to the Species at Risk Public Registry, farm field guides, lots of really great information on the website to support any project that you would want to put in for. Also, a little bit about applying for actual SARFIP and SARPAL. This is the process. You would, just a note about the fact that the website changes for this. Our standard website, which is OSCIA sorry for cost share, it changes to the OSCIA portal.org. So what you do is navigate over there, create an account, then you enroll your farm business. And after that, you submit your application. You would upload any documents and satellite maps that you would need to provide with that application. You wait for a project decision email. At that point, you would enter into either the SAR watch or conservation agreements once you're approved. Then you go ahead and implement your project, and then you submit your claim documents by that December 15th claim deadline. So how are you going to know when that intake launches and when the new program guides are listed? We often tell farmers that the best way to do that is to subscribe to our program's mailing list. We don't send many announcements out from this list other than there's new cost share opening and whether or not there is actual information, additional information sessions available for farmers specifically related to making an application. I've provided a QR code there, and as well there's the website address should anyone want to navigate over and subscribe to that program's mailing list. So that's my slides. Emma, thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Wonderful. I'll share my screen once more. Thanks again to all of our fabulous speakers. We really appreciate your willingness to share your expertise today and fill us in on what you know about hedgerows and the supports available for farmers and landowners. Let's open up the floor to questions. I know that we've covered a lot of ground, so people likely have some queries on their mind. So feel free to type a question into the chat or unmute yourself and speak if that's your preference. But we'll certainly make room for a few minutes of questions if anybody has them.
So there was one shared in the chat. A couple. So I'll just go through them one by one. So the first is, how do participants view county removal of roadside vegetation? Do not roadside hedgerows have the same value?
Interesting question.
And I'll open it up to any speakers that feel like they want to answer.
I'll say something. Several years ago, I was on the Environmental Advisory Committee for the City of Kawartha Lakes. And as part of that committee, you're asked to advise on different aspects of how things function within the city. And a proposal that I put in as part of that was about putting in windbreaks on the municipal side of fences along roads. It was well received by the city. And I think many years later, they actually started to implement something about that. But in regards to the removal of the vegetation, that's essentially, it's a safety thing. And they talked about that when I put that proposal together. They talked about different things like this particular question, the value of the hedgerow in the municipality. The municipality has foresters that work for them, and they do value them in every aspect that we're talking about today, but they have other things to consider, such as sight lines and safety, drainage, and maintenance. Essentially, it's one or the other. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Doug.
Yeah, thank you.
A couple more questions in the chat. So the next sort of addresses the same issue. So Helen asks, the onus is on the landowner or farmer in these funding programs. Are there any initiatives to modify or improve the hedgerow brushing practices of our regional townships? As she adds, in the UK, hedgerows are often designated as heritage and are protected.
Again, these are questions about municipal practices. I'm wondering if we can get some questions in regards to hedgerows and their use on agricultural land, because we can't comment on behalf of the city.
That's right. Okay. So the next question is looking for recommendations for species that can cope with high salt exposure and high winds and drought. So we had some great species recommendations from Sue right in the beginning, but I wonder if there's anything off the top that anyone has to share, or maybe a resource that we can point folks to as well.
Well, it's pretty easy to look at our current roadways and see what's thriving on the side of the road. There's different types of seed mixes for doing the perennial part of roadside and ditch maintenance. But when you're doing that's where all the high salt content is. So you'll get great insight of what survives well just by driving up and down the roads. Different types of poplar and cedar, but a lot of those trees are already on the other side of the drainage swale. So most of the road salt issue is in the bottom of the swale where it accumulates.
I think sea buckthorn is very salt tolerant. If you can get it established. I don't think it likes to be dry. But I think if you could water it while it was being established, I think it would do okay.
Fantastic, thanks. A funding specific question we have from Stephen. Maybe Jen, you can address this. So he asks, so they received grant money through SARPEL and SARFIP to not cut our field till after July 15th for the bobolinks and meadowlark nesting. Sounds like this was...
Yeah, so thanks very much for the question, Steve. Yes, you do need to apply every year. At one point in time, you could have put in for a 3-year term, but that's no longer the case. So it is something that you need to apply for every year.
Fantastic. And then more of a comment than a question. Rita says, farmers often remove this vegetation also with mowers or Roundup. This is to prevent weed seeds from entering fields. The township reflects the views of farmers, and we need to convince both that flowers and pussy willows have value. Thanks for that. Jackie says, Doug, I'd love to hear your thoughts on buckthorn.
Oh, it's a very successful plant. You know, a lot of birds love it, and there's lots of different arguments for it and a lot of different arguments against it. Invasive species is a pretty open topic right now, and there are some people in our industry who are extremely purist about what used to be here 100 years ago, and there are ideas of how the future looks. Currently, it's being managed on small scale and large scale. We've worked with different projects where you have herbicides being used to manage, and also just mechanical removal. But buckthorn, it's here to stay. You got to be honest about invasive species. They're all here to stay. They're not going anywhere. So do we talk about the problem, or do we talk about how we incorporate, what's happening here in our country, in our planet right now? So those are things that, that's an ethical conversation you get up for a long time.
Yeah, you make some great points, Doug. And Sue added in the chat as well that buckthorn's really attractive to pollinators and birds love it. So maybe it's not all bad. There was also a request for Susan's contact information. If you're comfortable with popping it in the chat, Sue, maybe you could do that. So that's it from questions in the chat. Feel free to keep adding them if you have anything else, or feel free to take yourself off mute and ask directly.
All right.
Okay, well, maybe that's all of the questions we have for today. I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. This has been such a wonderful learning opportunity. I know that I learned a lot. Just as a reminder, this was recorded, so the webinar will be made available on YouTube at a later date. So keep an eye out for that. And also keep your eyes peeled for another collaborative event coming up at the end of March. We're going to tackle alternative building materials on the 28th. But thanks again for all of our speakers for sharing their expertise with us. Really fabulous afternoon. Thanks, everybody.